Please do not underestimate my resolve to make sure that this hearing shows respect that everyone deserves, and people will be dealt with appropriately if that happens. So with that, I want to explain a little bit of the decorum. Testimony-wise, we've divided it up equally among the conferees, proponents, and opponents for the same amount of time, and we will have 10 minutes after each the proponents for questions. We'll have 10 minutes after the opponents for questions. And the proponents have 22 minutes, but two people are going to give 5-minute testimony, and the rest of them are only going to give 2-minute testimony. So they've decided to split their time up that way. So, and then for the opponents, it'll be 3 minutes apiece. And we will time, you have the sheet there ready to go. And so I think that about covers it. So the first proponent is, we will take bill introductions. Hopefully nobody's going to do that because we're out of time. Is there a bill introduction? Any bill introductions? Very quickly, because we are up against the time.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Heather Sprague, and on behalf of the Kansas Association of Chain Drug Stores, I would like to introduce RS number 2025 RS 0573, which would add COVID-19 to the currently allowed statewide protocols for pharmacist test and treatment.
Very good. Committee objections? Seeing none, bill is entered.
Thank you.
I appreciate all the people that wanted to introduce bills today that will do it tomorrow. All right, with that, we're going to get on to the proponents. Chloe. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Carly.
Carly Troy with the Reviser of Statutes Office. I'll try to make this brief as possible. So House Bill 2071 enacts the Help Not Harm Act to prohibit healthcare providers from treating a child whose gender identity is inconsistent with the child's sex, authorizes a civil cause of action against healthcare providers for providing such treatment, restricts the use of state funds to promote gender transitioning, prohibits professional liability insurance from covering damages for healthcare providers that provide gender transition treatments to minors, and mandates professional discipline against a healthcare provider who performs such treatments. Section 1 sets out the name of Sections 1 through 6 as the Help Not Harm Act and defines certain terms used within the bill. Section 2 would prohibit the use of state funds to pay for, subsidize, or promote social transitioning, medication, or surgery for a child as treatment for gender dysphoria. Subsection B prohibits an entity that receives state funds to in part pay for treatment of children for psychological conduction from prescribing, dispensing, or administering hormone treatments or puberty blockers, performing gender transition surgery, or providing a referral to another healthcare provider for such medication or surgery to a child experiencing gender dysphoria. Section 3, subsections A and B, would prohibit a healthcare provider from knowingly performing certain surgical procedures or prescribing, dispensing, or administering hormone treatments or puberty blockers to a child for the purpose of treatment arising from gender dysphoria, except as provided in subsections C and D of that section. Subsection C is an exception to the prohibition in subsections A and B for individuals born with a medically verifiable disorder of sex development. Subsection D is an exception to the prohibition in subsection A and B and would permit a healthcare provider who has initiated hormone treatments or puberty blockers prior to the effective date of this act and to continue such treatment until December 31st, 2025, if such healthcare provider develops a plan to reduce the child's use of such drug. Section 4 sets out repercussions for a healthcare provider who violates the consent or treatment prohibitions in Section 3. Subsection A sets out that if a healthcare provider violates Section 3, such provider's license shall be revoked by the appropriate licensing authority. Subsections B through D create a civil cause of action for violations of Section 3. Subsection C is a cause for action for parents whose child has experienced a violation of Section 3. The relief that a court could grant would be damages, equitable relief, cost of the suit, and attorney's fees. This cause of action would have a statute of limitation of 10 years. Subsection D is a cause of action for a child provided treatment in violation of Section 3. In this cause of action, a prevailing plaintiff could recover damages, equitable relief, the cost of the suit, and attorney's fees. This cause of action would have a statute of limitation for 10 years after the child turns 18 years of age. Section 5 would prohibit a professional liability policy issued to a healthcare provider from including coverages for damages assessed against a healthcare provider who provides treatment to a child in violation of Sections 3 or 4. Section 6 is a standard severability clause, and Section 7 amends KSA 65-2837 relating to professional discipline of Board of Healing Arts licensees to add violating the act as the definition of unprofessional conduct. The provisions of this bill would go into effect on July 1st, 2025.
Committee questions? Representative Opeza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Revisor, thank you for your explanation. Would you please clarify on page 4, line 31, how is that different from the current statute of anything when you're providing care for access to care for minors under the age of 18?
Mr. Chair, apologies, Representative. I can go and check that against existing law for you if you would like.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Winkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the revisor for the bill overview. I have one clarifying question about Section 3. I just want to clarify that this proposed legislation is not banning any one treatment in its entirety. It's only proposing to ban it for one group of people, and that is trans children.
Chairman, Representative, that is correct.
Thank you.
Representative Ruiz.
Thank you, Carly. In that Section 2, I'm looking at your bill brief. Just really good, thank you. It prohibits the use of state funds. Does it prohibit any of the treatment if you're paying private pay or, out of pocket or private insurance?
If I may, thank you, Mr. Chair, Jenna Moyer, Advisor Statutes Office with the TAG team. So Section 2 is specifically related to the state and the implementations of the state. And then Section 3 would be regardless of who's providing it or where. That would apply to all healthcare providers.
Okay.
Committee, further questions? Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if you can point out another instance where in the Kansas statute, the law is weaponized to penalize medical providers for working within their scope of practice, with threats of losing their license, threats of civil penalties for more than a decade, threats of withholding the ability to be covered by life or medical malpractice insurance. Can you think of another instance where the law is weaponized in this way?
Chairman, Representative, no representative.
Thank you.
Committee, further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Carly. Okay, now we will Chloe Cole. Welcome to committee.
My name is Chloe Cole, and I am a detransitioned 20-year-old woman from California who underwent medical transition from ages 12 to 16. I was given puberty blockers and testosterone at 13 and had a double mastectomy at 15 years old. My healthcare provider failed me in many ways, but the worst was pushing me towards medical transition when I was just a child. They should have protected me. I should have been guided with real care and helped to understand myself, instead of being led down a path that would ultimately end in an early demise. I was lied to that it would cure me of being female and make me into a young man. But what transition really is a series of poisons and bodily modifications that will ultimately end in an early death. Increased risk of stroke, heart attack, higher rates of all sorts of different cancers, permanent sterility, early onset osteoporosis, PCOS, stunted brain development, sexual dysfunction, early onset dementia, and of course, regret followed by extreme depression and suicidal ideation are all things that I think we can agree that a young woman or young man should not have to worry about. And yet here I am. My therapist and gender specialist ignored the deeper issues that led to me experiencing gender dysphoria. I began puberty early at 8 years old, and I felt this overwhelming discomfort with my changing body. I experienced unwanted sexual attention that materialized into a sexual assault. I was scared of my womanhood. Periods, childbirth, menopause, everything that I had heard about being a woman was only talked about as painful and terrifying. Instead of helping me overcome my fears, my doctors pushed transition as the answer. I didn't feel very strongly about my female role models, and I never really fit in amongst my sex as a tomboyish girl closer to her older brothers. I was later considered to be on the autistic spectrum, but my behaviors were misinterpreted as proof that I was transgender, rather than traits of neurodivergence. These traits, combined with my social and sensory processing differences, were taken as proof of me being a young man, rather than characteristics that made me think differently, that made me a unique young woman. Instead of receiving proper support, I was fast-tracked into medical transition. I have suffered a multitude of complications from the blockers, the cross-sex hormones, and surgery. My quality of life is still being impacted to this day. The treatments cause menopause-like symptoms, joint, nerve, and shooting spinal pains, and lasting urinary and sexual issues. My surgeon avoided me when I detransitioned. He refused to provide care, and he gave me advice that worsened my physical condition. The skin grafts from my mastectomy began failing 2 years later, leaving me with permanent wounds requiring bandages. I don't know what the status of my fertility is, if I'm ever going to be able to become a mother. But I know that I am never going to be able to nurse my future children. My parents initially resisted medical intervention because they wanted to allow me to grow into an adult first. They wanted me to be comfortable, but they were not okay with going beyond shorter haircuts and dressing and presenting as a boy. They wanted me to explore without intervention, but doctors manipulated them with the false ultimatum. Would you rather have a dead daughter or a living son? They loved me. They wanted me to be okay, and this was the only option that they were given. So they were coerced into consenting. The doctors insisted that all children have a stable gender identity from a young age, often citing a regret rate of transitioning as less than 1 to 2%. But the supposed rates of transition regret are misleading. Many detransitioners like me are excluded from these surveys and studies. No parent, doctor, or government has the right to sterilize or mutilate children. This is abuse of a child's basic human rights. There is no excuse anymore for continuing this practice as the rest of the world and most of this country is backpedaling from this as quickly as it can. It's a shame that this is something that we still have to discuss in this legislature. This is a pivotal moment, an opportunity to safeguard the future of countless children. Kansas has entrusted you with the responsibility to make decisions to protect their right to grow into healthy, thriving adults. Seize this moment to stand on the right side of history. Protect children from what I and many of my generation have endured. Thank you for your commitment to protecting the health, safety, and future of the children in your state. Your leadership in this moment will make a lasting difference for generations to come. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Next, we have Jamie Reed. Jamie, welcome to committee.
Good afternoon. My name is Jamie Reed, and I hold a Master's of Science in Clinical Research Management from Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. I am a lifelong Democrat, a mom of 5 boys, and a lesbian. I am also the public whistleblower from a pediatric gender center. I saw patients from the age of 3 until the age of 26, and I worked with nearly 1,500 unique patients. I worked in pediatric gender medicine for nearly 5 years, and I was once a true believer. What I learned is that these outcomes are based on poor research with poor evidence and poor outcomes. Last week, 2 new systematic reviews of evidence were published in Canada, both of those finding that puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones have limited to no evidence to support their use. Last night in Queensland, Australia, puberty blockers were banned for those under the age of 18. In the center where I worked, I saw directly the patients who were harmed by these interventions, patients whose mental health got worse after initiation, patients who mourned the permanent changes to their bodies. We had a patient who had their breasts surgically removed call us 3 months later, devastated, begging for us to put her breasts back on. I sent patients to the emergency room for surgery after the devastation of testosterone degraded their vaginal tissues, and they experienced vaginal lacerations requiring surgical repair. I blew the whistle on these interventions in Missouri, filed an affidavit with our Attorney General, and within 6 months, these interventions were stopped. But Kansas City Children's Mercy had the ability to keep on doing this to the kids in your state. This all started with a small group of clinicians in the Netherlands coming up with this idea to transition kids. They were seeking the children that they believed would go on to have lifelong trouble with their sex and intervene when they were young. Why? Because the transsexual adults that they were working with were not doing well. When they completed their first study, they found that these young people were proto-gay youth. 68 out of 70 were same-sex attracted, and they transitioned them. Not because they had any certainty that they would go on to have lifetime troubles with their sex, but because our society has a long history of discomfort with the way that gays and lesbians like me live our lives in our sexed bodies. We were expendable. We were okay to be harmed, to have our endocrine systems destroyed with wrong sex hormones. We were okay to have our fertility taken away. We were okay to have our sexual function destroyed. Then the British tried to repeat the Dutch study. They cast a wider net, and this time they caught the proto-gay youth, and now they're catching the vulnerable kids with autism and trauma. They transitioned them, and they tried to do the study again, and the outcomes were so poor that they buried the research. The British have now banned the use of puberty blockers. Then we caught wind of this idea in the United States, and we cast this huge net across our entire country and every single state and pulled in whoever we could catch. And guess who we caught? The proto-gay youth, the vulnerable, the children with autism, those with mental health concerns, and trauma. And then we caught a new group of kids. We caught the kids who were on TikTok, and we harmed them through COVID lockdowns. We caught the straight girls like Chloe with good-intentioned, well-intentioned liberal parents, and we transitioned them. The social contagion is real. And when these girls began to realize that there was a problem and stand up and say, "Stop harming us," we began to listen. We needed to listen when these were the proto-gay kids. We need to listen when we started doing this to the kids that were going to grow up to be gay. To my LGBT community listening, and to all of the young people who have been sold this line that trans is the right way, it is a lie. We are resilient and strong. We do not need any medications to change our bodies. You do not have to lose a body part or risk medical harms or change anything about yourself to be embraced and accepted. We do not have to conform to straight people's ideas of what our bodies should look like. Trans is the most homophobic idea ever considered.
Please.
We were once given electroshock treatments to try to make us straight. We were once forcibly raped to try to make us straight, and now we are being transed. We are perfect just the way that we are. No one needs to cut off any of your body parts to make you authentic. Please stop just supporting this destruction, and our community needs to fight back with everything that we have.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Next, we have Lucretia. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. I'm Lucretia Knoll, the Public Policy Specialist for the Kansas Catholic Conference, where I represent the Catholic Bishops of Kansas. Quickly, and I've said this before, but it just bears repeating, of what the church teaches, and the Catholic Church teaches that we are to love, respect, show compassion to all people, and this includes people who do not share or embrace or view our embrace our view of the gift and beauty of human sexuality. Now, last year when I testified, I told you guys all a really quick story about my religious ed class that I teach, and one class, I sang for them. They thought I sounded like Taylor Swift. A couple classes later, they told me I needed singing lessons. More up-to-date story, more relevant, my nephew thinks I'm 40 years old. I say that with love to anybody who's above 40. But if you ask him how old his dad is, who's my younger brother, he says his dad is 3 years old. I say these because kids are innocent. They're sweet. They're curious about the world, and they're just trying to figure out the world and who they are in it. And it is our responsibility as adults to help show them the truth, beauty, and goodness that is out there and who they are and who God created them to be, and not affirm them in a lie. And I'll wrap up with a quote from Pope Francis, who has spoken very compassionately about those who are struggling with gender ideology. And I quote, "Destroy at its roots God's most basic plan for human beings, diversity, distinction. It would make everything homogeneous, neutral. It is an attack on difference, on the creativity of God, and on men and women." And with that, committee, I ask that you fully support HB 2071, and I will stand for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Aaron, Dr. Aaron Lackkamp. Thank you for being here.
Well, I wonder what I got myself into. I heard about this recently, that this was coming up on Sunday, and I was working. I decided to come on my own volition to speak what I thought was the truth. So with respect to everyone, hopefully that everyone will understand one another. My perspective, my name is Dr. Aaron Lackkamp. I'm an ICU doctor. I take care of critically ill patients, and specifically in neurologically injured critically ill patients. I live in Kansas. I practice in Kansas, and I've been in practice for over 20 years. I came here because of personal experience. I am not a child psychiatrist, but I am an ICU doctor who takes care of people who have had suicide attempts. And I've had a couple consecutive patients who were post-gender surgery who came to me in a comatose state and in a likely permanent vegetative state as a result of suicide attempt and anoxic injury. So I would caution everyone thinking that this is a cure-all for suicidal ideation. And I just wanted to put a plug in that there are more effective ways of addressing suicide. We have a suicide hotline. We need to have outreach for, for suicide prevention. The second part of my thing I'd like to say, just from personal experience, some vignettes about people that I know. The little boy that put on lipstick, try to wipe it off, it wouldn't come off. Dad sees him. It's like, why are your lips so bright? The little boy that put on mom's shoes because they look like Minnie Mouse shoes, and then walked around in mom's coat. That kid didn't need surgery. The little girl that likes math and likes science, throws a football better than all the boys. They said that she's a boy. She doesn't need surgery. I'm sorry, I have to quit. But I just want to say that they don't need surgery. So, and then they need to be loved and nurtured, and they want to. Sorry, I have to say two more things. So
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we want to. You want to allow them to be able to call the police, say I've been raped. You want them to be able to go to the doctor's office and go to the.
Thank you very much. Okay. Next, we have Jane Anderson, virtual. Is she? Okay, very good.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Jane Anderson, Vice President of the American College of Pediatricians and retired clinical professor of pediatrics. As a pediatrician, I strove to provide compassionate care for all patients, desiring that each child and adolescent thrive. I'm here today to provide you with scientific evidence. 1, no human is born in the wrong body. There are 2 biological sexes determined by our chromosomes. No outward physical alterations can change that. 2, gender ideology is based upon thoughts and feelings. 3, gender dysphoria is not permanent. Youth who feel uncomfortable in their biological sex, if allowed to progress through normal puberty with the natural increases in sex hormones that contribute to the development of the adolescent brain, will, at the end of puberty, desist and feel comfortable in their biological sex at least 85% of the time. 4, gender dysphoria is not an isolated phenomenon. As you've heard, most youth who feel uncomfortable in their biological sex have experienced previous trauma, including adverse childhood events such as emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, or they have an underlying mental health concern such as depression, anxiety, or they have autism spectrum disorder. 5, mental health evaluation and support for the patient and family is recognized as the standard of care for these minors. 6, medical and surgical interventions have not proven to be safe or effective. Instead, they are harmful, mutilating, and sterilizing. They do not treat the depression and anxiety experienced by these youth, nor do they decrease the risk of suicide. Systematic reviews performed in multiple European countries demonstrate this. Dr. Hilary Cass, the lead author of the Cass report, called out the American Academy of Pediatrics for, quote, holding on to a position that is demonstrated to be out of date by multiple systematic reviews.
Doctor,
7,
thank you very much. Thank you very much. Conferees, I might remind you to keep your time to the allotted time so we have time for everybody. So thank you very much. Next, we have Jay Richards. He's also virtual. Is he on there? Jay, welcome to committee.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. I'm a director at the Heritage Foundation studying the effects of gender ideology in culture and medicine. As you've heard in recent years, the U.S. has seen a huge spike in the number of minors diagnosed with distress over their sex bodies, now called gender dysphoria. But fueling these alarming statistics is not science, but an ideology derived from critical theory. The gender ideology that we're talking about displaces the sexual binary of male and female with the subjective and circular notion of gender identity that's independent of the body. So its champions typically define gender identity as, quote, one's internal sense of gender, and replace sex with a mere social construct called sex assigned at birth. The most toxic fruit of this ideology, however, is in medicine. Hence the intervention called gender affirming care. Gender affirming in this context is in effect sex denying. But here's the dirty little secret. There's no good scientific evidence that these treatments improve the long-term health of these minors, let alone that the benefits outweigh the many risks. As already mentioned, the Cass review in 2024 in the UK included 9 studies, 8 of which were systematic reviews, showing the poor quality of evidence of these interventions. And just last week, experts at McMaster University released 2 new systematic reviews confirming this. In a less troubled world, all doctors would follow the rule to first do no harm. For now, it falls to bodies like this one in Kansas to protect children from these experiments. This bill does not target a specific group. It targets a destructive medical intervention already restricted or prohibited in half of U.S. states. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next we have Joseph Cole, virtual. Is he on there?
Can you hear me, Chairman?
Yes. Welcome to committee. Welcome to committee, Joseph.
Thank you, Chairman, and members of the committee. My name is Joseph Combe. I'm an attorney and the Public Policy Director at Family Policy Alliance, and I'm encouraging you to vote yes on House Bill 2071. As you've heard by now, children afflicted with gender dysphoria are being preyed upon in droves. In their search for help, they approach medical professionals they ought to be able to trust, but instead, they are being told that the only possible way to relieve their dysphoria is to reject their bodies and somehow, quote unquote, transition into the opposite sex. Now, sex transition is not only impossible, but irreversibly and horrifyingly harmful to these children. And attempting to do so sets them down a one-way experimental path that leads only to drug dependency, the amputation and mutilation of healthy body parts, sterilization, and many other adverse medical outcomes. Now, for children who experience distress identifying with their sex, research consistently demonstrates that they come to embrace their sex in adolescence or adulthood. This fact alone renders physiological interventions unnecessary and reinforces the fact that these serious interventions are not the answer. These children need and deserve real help, not harm. HB 2071 would ensure Kansas children receive that help and are protected from these dangerous and irreversible sex transition interventions. The bill is also victim-centric. It provides these children with a private right of action to recover actual damages for the horror inflicted upon them by medical professionals they ought to be able to trust. Now, no amount of money could possibly restore what's been taken from them, but this bill correctly aims to make them as whole as possible. And finally, HB 2071 ensures these vulnerable children receive the help they need. It protects their access to therapy and other helpful treatments, such as antidepressant medication. It creates an environment that ensures any children with comorbidities like depression or anorexia receive proper treatment for those conditions, rather than forcing a tunnel-visioned one-way transition pipeline that would leave those comorbidities totally untreated. So in conclusion, I'll just ask you to please vote yes on HB 2071. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Next, we have Brittany Jones. Brittany, welcome to committee.
Chairman Carpenter and members of the committee, my name is Brittany Jones, and I'm an attorney and the Director of Policy and Engagement for Kansas Family Voice. We represent thousands of Kansans who are concerned about the threat of these experimental procedures and drugs on Kansas kids. We support HB 2071 because it ensures that Kansas children will be given time to pursue the therapies that will not permanently alter their bodies. HB 2071 helps kids by holding those accountable who would put their well-being at risk for the sake of their ideologies. Kids deserve help and not harm as they grow towards adulthood. We've seen throughout multiple studies the harm that these drugs can do to children, and we know personal stories, as you've heard today, of what these procedures have done to children. We ask that you join the 23 other states, the multiple countries, and even multiple appellate courts that have upheld these laws and protecting kids from these harmful procedures and these experimental drugs. We ask that you pass HB 2071 out favorably, and I stand open for questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. So committee, we will have 10 minutes of questioning. I would like to call one person. If you have questions for one person, we would have that person answer any questions for them at that time. So committee question, Representative McDonald, and who would you like to call?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple questions for Dr. LeCamp.
Doctor, thank you for coming back up here. Committee, are there other questions for Dr. LeCamp? Seeing none. Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. If it's okay, I have two questions. I really do appreciate the service you give to our community. Your testimony explained pretty well why you have hesitation for the surgical portions of this bill, but you ask for trans individuals to be helped with suicide prevention. And I'm not sure if you've read the entire bill, but it prevents all counselors from prescribing medications to help with depression or anxiety or anything like that. You mentioned a suicide hotline, but counselors who would staff the hotline would be breaking the law. Would you like to revise your stance on that portion of the law?
I did read through the document. When I read, and I don't read legalese, but when I read Section 4, it seemed to, that's when it referred to which subsections were, it would be, have a punitive component, and it seemed to be 3A and 3B.
Hang on, Doctor, we're getting clarification here right now from our revisers.
And that was the,
I'm not sure that's part of the bill.
oh, okay, maybe,
You're not sure that counselors would be unable to provide medical?
Let me at least say my statement, and then I'll let you guys discuss. But so, from my perspective, and then I'll leave it, is that it looked like the Section 4 said this is where what referred to the penalties. Penalties were in 3 and 3B. 3 and 3B were chemical intervention and surgical intervention. That was how I read it. And I think it's actually great to talk about this so that when it goes forward, you could be clear on what it says. I think that not being required to have referral is also an important component so that things aren't become institutionalized. And then I think it's also important to say that where we're talking about symptoms, perhaps, and less a disease, and that may be one way of thinking of this. There might actually be nothing wrong with these kids in terms of you're giving them a disease, giving them a diagnosis, giving them surgery. Giving them surgery means that there's something wrong with the kids. I don't think there's anything wrong with the kids. I think they need to be loved, nurtured, and then encouraged. I think they need to have full access to go into school, and they need to be able to call the police if they're worried. They need to be able to seek, get all the services and with the counselors, and I think that's what they need.
They should have.
I think that
mental
they
health
should
care.
have. I think that having surgery on kids is a bad idea.
Okay.
And I think that you should let them grow up. Well, the answer is, what did you do with the kid? You love the kid. You love and embrace the kid.
Thank you, Doctor, for that. Representative Opeza, she has a question for you also. Sorry, you're not quite off the hook yet, but.
Sorry, and I do wish I hadn't come, actually. Okay.
Just relax.
Okay.
Thank you for being here today and offering your
perspective.
thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah, perspective, thoughts. My question was, I know you'd given the caveat to working in the ICU, but in this particular
I take
population.
care of adults and kids.
Adults and kids.
Mostly adults, almost
mostly adults.
99%, yeah.
And then given this particular population, do you have any type of certification or anything behind with this population? Any type of educational
No, I just tell you
background?
that my perspective, I see the tail end after the suicide has been attempted and they have neurologic injury.
Okay.
That's what I see.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. Committee, further questions?
I have a quick question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Steins, and who would you like to?
So I'm not sure if this is a question for Jamie Reed or for Dr. Jane Anderson, but we talked to Jamie, I think you brought up social contagion. And so that is, I think, a real question that I have. Do we know the percentage of children or minors that received surgery, say, maybe 20 years ago? Not to give that, like in the last, I guess what I'm saying is when I look at social media and all the contagions that's, those things have brought, because I think that's a good point to bring up. I'm just curious if anybody knows the number of children that received these surgeries, or minors, I'm sorry, under the age of 18 prior to, I just say 20 years because I'm not sure how long Facebook itself and some of those have been around now.
So I think your question goes back to when did these interventions first get introduced in the pediatric population?
Yes, and how many?
Sure. So I think my answer, I'll try to make it brief. There was one study that was run in the Netherlands. It tried to be repeated in England. They had poor outcomes and results. There was a clinic that was started here in Boston under Dr. Norman Spack. It was not opened underneath a clinical research protocol as it should have been. and it was allowed to move forward as what's called the standard of care. That actually just snowballed across the country. There are maps that can show that we started out with a tiny handful of clinics and then a huge increase in spike in the number of clinics. What I can say from my own center in terms of social contagion is we did not only hire me as a caseworker, we actually hired a school liaison to go into the schools and to teach children about being trans. I don't know any ear, nose, and throat doctor's office that hires somebody to go teach children about ear infections. We were going into the schools. We taught the guardian ad litems in the foster care system. I personally taught judges and foster care guardian ad litems about trans kids. We helped create this, and then what we started to see was after COVID, this huge spike. We saw kids coming in with TikTok tics. We saw kids coming in believing that they had multiple personalities. We saw kids coming in believing that they had seizures that they didn't have. I had 2 patients believe that they were blind, and they were not blind. They all also had a trans identity. We do not have enough research to understand how widespread this social contagion is, but there was nothing like this 20 years ago. Nothing.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. We have time for one more question, very briefly. Representative Bueller, and this would be for Dr. Jane Anderson. Are you still on?
So thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Anderson. So one of the things that the opponents of this bill push, when we talk about, and I think Chloe actually mentioned it, when doctors pushed her family into strongly pushed her into a transition. So we hear that through the use of puberty blockers, hormone blockers, the sex reassignment surgeries, that there are often no complications with those, that they are in fact reversible, and they are in fact no side effects, if in fact somebody wants to reverse course on this. So my question to you is this the truth? Are those statements correct about them being no complications, not being reversible, and no side effects? And then maybe the second part of that is, will a person who has completed a sex transition therapy be prescribed medical therapies for life to maintain that post-transition therapy? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I'm going to answer your second question first. It's very simple. Yes, people who have transitioned will require medication lifelong. And people have looked at the cost of this for our healthcare. It's phenomenal. But yes, they will absolutely be lifelong patients. And the surgeries often have numerous complications that cause additional surgeries to be needed. In regards to puberty blockers, puberty is a critical time-limited period in which the brain is going to develop and mature. And sex steroids, or the cross-sex hormones that are being given, have significant impact on that developing adolescent brain. So we know that normally the sex hormones are going to organize the brain. They're going to help it develop, make the right connections. And in fact, researchers say that adolescence is a sensitive period for the sex-specific effects of those sex steroid hormones on the brain and behavioral development. And unfortunately, we do not have a clue what happens when we pause puberty, when we stop puberty with those puberty blockers. In addition, puberty blockers have their own known side effects, including emotional lability and irritability, things we're trying to prevent. And in Great Britain, when the Tavistock Clinic, which is so well known, did an early study putting children on puberty blockers, here's a quote from their study. Children reported greater self-harm, and girls experienced more behavioral and emotional problems and expressed greater dissatisfaction with their bodies
thank you so much.
on puberty blockers.
Very good. Thank you, doctor, for that. We're out of time. Okay. Carly has some clarification on Representative McDonald's question.
So, pardon me. In section 2 in sub B on line 15, or just above it in line 14, does say shall not prescribe, dispense, or administer medication. And then a little further, as provided in section 3. So if you'll direct your attention to page 3, line 6, I believe. There's some medications there, and in line 7, there are medications there. So those would be the ones prohibited under this bill.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Okay, next we'll have proponent or opponents. And first opponent is Aiden Lee. Aiden, welcome to committee.
Hello, my name is Aiden Lee. My pronouns are he, they. I'm currently a high school student in Kansas. I'm a transgender man and have been out as transgender for 2 years. Though I've not done any transitions medically, social transition has been a huge part of my journey and discovery. And the censorship and silencing of transgender people, especially trans kids and teens, is a pressing matter that I hold very near to me as it affects me directly. I have been raised and socialized as a female for most of my life, and coming from a religious household, I was told that expressing yourself as your assigned gender at birth was the only way of living. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm very nervous. But the feeling of being in the wrong body and looking in the mirror to see something that isn't who I am on the inside is one of the hardest things I've ever had to overcome. Living this life and having to grapple with the fact that this isn't who I am led me into a long spiral of depression and eventually suicidal thoughts, because how was I ever able to focus on my aspirations and education when I can't be myself to begin with? When I came out, I began to socially transition. This was a huge moment for me that changed my life for the better. When I was finally able to dress masculine and present how I felt on the inside, I was no longer depressed and finally could look in the mirror and see a glimpse of myself shining through. My biggest supports were teachers. Almost every teacher I told about my transition was very accepting, and while they might not have understood it, they still did their best to support me. Teachers are some of the only people that have made me feel safe and welcome in a space because they use my preferred name and pronouns. As the active president for my GSA and having multiple conversations with fellow trans and gender non-conforming students, I can confidently state that for many students, school is the only safe place for them to be out, and teachers are some of the only ones who see them for who they truly are. If this bill goes through, it means my fellow trans peers and I won't be able to express ourselves freely amongst the other students. Nor will we be able to comfortably or safely exist in an environment that for some is our only safe space. It also means teachers will no longer be able to provide support to the students who need it most. The passing of HB 2071 will actively cause harm to trans children. Gender affirming of trans individuals, be it medical or not, is life-saving. And the discontinuance of LGBTQ+ language and care in any setting will not stop children from being trans or queer. The only thing it does is remove support for children who need it most. This is why, on behalf of myself and fellow trans children, I ask you not to pass this bill.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Anthony Alvarez. Anthony, welcome to committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair and committee, for letting me speak. My name is Anthony. I am a Kansan. I am a member of House District 34. I'm a KU honors student, and I'm a transgender man. I came out and received medical transition here at the age of 16. The medical care I received was absolutely extraordinary. Every single question that my parents asked, every doubt that they had was addressed. We were told explicitly the dangers and risks that were involved, however minuscule. I was never felt once pushed or forced into something that I did not care about or had no knowledge of. Something important that I want to mention is that this type of decision was something that should have stayed between me, myself, and my healthcare providers. But even at the time, in 2020, I knew that there was the potential for that care to be legislated out. When I think about the medical care I received, I realized that that medical care was life-saving. And when my parents tell me how they feel seeing me before and seeing me after, they tell me that I seem a lot more comfortable in myself. I personally feel that I am consistently happier. I feel more confidence. And I am thankful for the young man that I have grown into. Looking back now at my decision transition and my time in school, I recognize how life-saving the medical care and recognition I received was. My transition was supported by my teachers and administrators while in school. They allowed me the dignity of being treated and referred to as any other young man in their building. This opportunity was immeasurably important to me, as with including extracurriculars, I spent around 50 hours a week there. I cannot imagine having the place where I spent the majority of my time feel hostile to me. While I was transitioning and a minor, my parents repeatedly asked me if I would want to move to a state that would be more accepting of my situation. I repeatedly told them no. The people that I loved and the life I had made was here in Kansas. Now, as I approach graduation, I find myself asking those same questions again. I love Kansas and I would like to stay here for the rest of my life. Laws like this set a precedent, and they also make me incredibly sympathetic to people that are in my situation that would be affected by it. I urge you to think of the young transgender Kansans in your care when you vote for this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Next, we have Candace. Candace Moran. Oh, I see that. Sorry. Ready? Candace, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, and we have 3 minutes, correct?
Yes. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. My name is Dr. Candace Moran. I'm a psychologist working in Kansas City, Kansas. I've been working with transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming individuals for pretty much my entire career, spanning at least the last 15 years. I've received extensive training and continuing education in transgender and non-binary mental health care, gender affirming care, and I'm a non-binary person myself. I currently primarily work providing therapy for current and future healthcare providers, many of whom are also queer, trans, and non-binary themselves, and or want to provide gender affirming care in the future. I'm also the mom of a non-binary elementary student who has given me permission to share how this bill would negatively impact them and their community. There is not an area of my life that would not be impacted by this bill, as is the same for many of the other folks in this room. And I'm here today sharing to ask you to allow transgender and non-binary minors and their families the autonomy to make their medical decisions in collaboration with their highly trained healthcare providers. My child shared their non-binary identity with us at the age of 5, and they've been out at their school since kindergarten. They've experienced a lot of support from family, friends, and their therapist. And when they're in an affirming environment, they're thriving. However, they've also experienced a lot of bullying, threats of violence, misgendering, and a lot of trauma that a child their age should not have experienced. And as a result, have experienced symptoms of depression, anxiety, trauma, and more. And that is the direct result of the negative impacts from the violence and bullying, unlike others would have you believe it's not the result of them being trans. They're terrified of puberty due to that dysphoria and the misgendering and bullying they experience. And the bright light in all of this for them has been the prospect of puberty blockers. This bill would take away that hope, the thing that has been sustaining them, it would take it away. And I'm honestly afraid of what that would look like, as I know the statistics. 66% of transgender and non-binary youth have thought about suicide. 42% of transgender and non-binary adults have attempted suicide in their lifetimes, and research has shown that transgender and non-binary adults who receive puberty suppression and puberty blockers as adolescents are significantly less likely to experience suicidal ideation in their lifetimes. I also work with a lot of healthcare providers and future healthcare providers, many of whom are considering leaving the state of Kansas after their training and or even before, as they are worried that they are going through extensive schooling, research, training, and more, and they will not be able to practice in a way that is in line with their ethics and field's best practices, leaving them open to burnout and moral injury because they're not able to practice in line with their training and expertise. As such, I am here asking you to please vote no on House Bill 2071, and I thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much for coming to committee. Next, we have D.C. Hiegert on behalf of the American Civil Liberties Union. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. My name is D.C. Hiegert. I'm a lawyer testifying on behalf of the ACLU of Kansas. We stand strongly opposed to HB 2071. This bill likely violates the constitutional rights of Kansas children, parents, therapists, doctors, and teachers. And poses an unprecedented threat to Kansas families by banning the only evidence-based healthcare options available for youth experiencing gender dysphoria. HB 2071 forces the government into healthcare decisions that should be between a provider, the patient, and the patient's family. And it violates Kansans' constitutional right to personal autonomy, which the Kansas Supreme Court said, quote, includes the ability to control one's own body, to assert bodily integrity, and to exercise self-determination. The United States Supreme Court is also poised to issue a ruling in a lawsuit dealing with a similar bill out of Tennessee, and that ruling will be controlling here in Kansas. Passing new bills restricting this care now would waste critical government resources and taxpayer dollars, as all states will receive guidance from the Supreme Court on the legality of such laws in the coming months. In addition to its legal concerns, this bill also threatens Kansas medical providers with lawsuits and license revocation for simply trying to do their jobs. And it doesn't stop with medical providers. It also attempts to ban aspects of social transitioning by implicating state-funded facilities and state employees in its limiting provisions, raising extreme concerns about this bill's reach. Kansans have shown you year after year that we do not want this bill because we know it will cause serious harm. And I do not mean that in an abstract sense. Kansas children will suffer. Kansas families will suffer. The practice of medicine will be compromised, and not just for trans people, but for everyone in our state. I'm sharing this testimony as an ACLU lawyer, but also as a lifelong Kansan and a transgender person myself. The very care this bill attacks is the reason I'm alive and able to advocate for my fellow Kansans' rights. I love Kansas, and I'm proud to call it my home. I know countless other trans people, many in this room, that feel the same way. But bills like HB 2071 tell us Kansas does not love us back. People will not stop being trans because Kansas bans this care or punishes its medical providers. Trans people will still exist in Kansas and in every state in our country, just as they always have. Please don't make it harder for these young Kansans to live their dreams and contribute to our state, their families, and their communities. We urge you to oppose HB 2071. Thank you, committee.
Thank you very much for being here. Next, we have Elise Flatland. Elise, welcome to committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Elise Flatland. I am a volunteer with Equality Kansas, but I'm also here on behalf of my family. I have lived in Kansas many years. My family has lived in Kansas for generations. My husband and I have 4 children. All were born and raised in Kansas. 2 of our children are receiving gender-affirming care. My son has always been the happiest child I've ever known. We used to call him Sunshine when he was a toddler because of his infectious joy. However, when he was in 4th grade, everything changed. He began waking up in tears, and I often had to physically carry him into school while he was fighting me to avoid going. That winter, we discovered cuts on his arms and legs. He confessed to cutting himself with scissors. All sharp objects were secured in our home, but I still found new cuts. He admitted that when he was upset or anxious, he would cut himself in the restroom at school. The school implemented a safety plan, but months later, they called us to tell us we would need to have a mental health evaluation on him before he was allowed to return to school. Our son was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for suicidal thoughts. It was one of the hardest moments of our lives, being told that we couldn't keep him safe from his own pain. After diagnosis and medication, our son began to recover. We will never forget the day he came home from school and told us, "I had the best day ever." The reason? He told his class he was a boy and asked to be called a new name. After his mental health was stabilized, he was diagnosed with gender dysphoria, and we sought out a doctor who specializes in gender-affirming care. Today, my son knows who he is and is thriving. He knows he is loved, respected, and supported, not despite of who he is, but because of who he is. My husband and I are appalled that this bill would take away our parental right to make medical decisions for our children when we have seen firsthand the impact those decisions have on their well-being. I am standing before you today, imploring you, please don't take my sunshine away.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here. Next, we have Dr. Erica Joby. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Erica Job, and I am a clinical therapist and a social worker from Wichita. I've been working with transgender clients for many, many years. I've had hundreds of clients, both children and adults. And I'm here today confused because I don't understand why I have to explain to the Republican Party, which is a party that has constantly said that they're for small government, why they need to stay out of other people's health care. I find it ironic that I'm standing here the day after Holocaust Remembrance Day, begging you to not make this a fascist police state by making other people's decisions for them, and to treat humans like they're human beings. We do not eliminate entire groups of people in this country. That is not what we do. I could stand here and I could tell you the facts and the statistics. There's always going to be argument about which studies are correct and which are not. I find it disturbing that the decisions are being made solely off of emotion and religion. And I find it disturbing that it appears to most of us who are here again, arguing this over and over and over again, that you don't care about your constituents unless they're far right leaning. I'd like to tell you a story right now about a 17-year-old girl that I know. She was assigned male at birth. As early as 2 and 3 years old, she started verbalizing that she was a girl. She wanted to dress like a girl, be treated like a girl, live like a girl, and have a girl's name. She is a girl. Her parents, being educated on gender dysphoria, started to affirm her identity and identity expression. This girl started school as a girl. Her name was legally changed to a girl's name. Her teachers, peers, and everyone she encounters at school know her as a girl. She is now a teenager. She's been taking puberty blockers. Her parents, medical doctor, endocrinologist, and therapist all agree with the child's choice. It's very clear that this is and what was the best decision for her. If this bill becomes law, she'll be banned from taking puberty blockers. She'll be forced to detransition. She'll be forced to use the boys' bathroom at school. She'll be forced to develop a boy's body. She'll be exposed as a biological male in front of her peers and everyone else at school. And I come here because I would like someone to please explain to me how this is in the best interest of this child. Because in my opinion, when this child develops extreme mental health issues, attempts or succeeds in taking her own life, and or is relentlessly bullied, it's going to be because of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. Next, we have Gabriel. Gabriel, welcome to committee.
Sorry, I don't know if I was supposed to move that. Chair Carpenter and members of the committee, my name is Gabriel Padilla. I'm a proud born and raised Kansan from Wichita. I'm here today in opposition to the proposed legislation that wants to ban gender-affirming care for minors in Kansas. As a transgender man who has been transitioning since 2013 with 9 years of experience in the classroom, I can tell you that this legislation is more harmful than good. I'm a math teacher with the privilege of working with students of all backgrounds, experiences, and identities. Today, I stand in opposition to the bill, House Bill 2071, because it fundamentally violates the rights of children and their families. Every student, no matter what their age, should have the autonomy to decide what is best for their bodies. As a transgender individual, I know firsthand how critical it is to have the ability to make informed decisions about one identity. And I believe that right belongs to every person, every young person, especially those who are most vulnerable. The choice to affirm one's gender should not be dictated by the government, but by the people living in that body and their family. No one knows a child better than those who love and care for them. Children are entitled to respect, compassion, and support as they navigate their journeys. By imposing restrictions on gender-affirming care, we are not only infringing on the rights and the freedoms, but we are also sending a harmful message that their identities do not matter. Every person deserves the dignity to express themselves fully, and no law should stand in that way. Please vote no on House Bill 2071. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for being here. Next, we have Johnny Dunlap. Virtual. Johnny, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
We can. Welcome to committee.
All right, thank you. So first, let me thank the committee for allowing me to do this. I'm testifying today from the perspective of a teacher. I've been a teacher for 11 years. I have a Master of Science in Education. I can tell you that this bill will get in the way of my ability to teach my students because I will be prevented by law from engaging with them in a manner that they will feel they can trust me. And I'm a coach. I travel with kids every weekend throughout the entire school year, all over the state of Kansas. That trust is important. I can tell you that if the adults in their life do not engage with them in a manner that is respectful and in the manner in which they would like to be engaged with, such as pronouns and chosen names, that will tell the other children that it's okay to treat these children, these trans kids, like lesser and like they're unimportant and unworthy of respect. This bill goes too far. I do not check my First Amendment rights at the door when I walk into the building. I challenge the legislature to tell me how they can tell me how I can engage with my students. That's ridiculous. It puts me in a position where I have to choose between my livelihood and treating my students with basic decency, dignity, and respect. This bill is shameful at best. And the last couple of things. Things like this is what pushes people out of the teaching profession. Kansas has a severe teaching shortage. And the district I teach in, there are more than 70 positions filled by long-term subs. And I'm not sure how many went unfilled because we just don't have enough teachers. I think that Kansans have already spoken to this legislature about dictating what medical care they can receive when we voted just a couple of years ago to stop this legislature from trying to ban women's health care in Kansas. And I want to add two more things. It's very telling when you have hate groups like the Heritage Foundation and the Family Policy Alliance on the side of this bill. That's very telling as to what this bill is and who it's from. And lastly, my classroom will always be a safe and caring learning environment despite any discriminatory legislation this body might pass. So please, please, kill this in committee. Don't pass this legislation. It's awful, it's bigoted, and it's wrong.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Next, we have Christy Kahn. Christy, welcome to committee.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Christy Kahn, and I am a concerned constituent here to talk about HB 2071. The reason this bill is so important to me that I made the trip from Colby all the way here today is that my one and only child was transgender. I say was because he completed suicide in his dorm room because of bills like this being passed in this country. He was made to feel like his life did not matter, that he did not deserve to live, by adults and politicians who have decided they know better than him or others like him than us parents, and the doctors or specialists who have the knowledge, expertise, and experience in this actual type of care. Those who attack transgender people, young and old, have no idea what is involved or what our families go through. I did everything I could to help my child, including taking my child all over the state seeking help from specialists. People like to say we or the schools or social media are pushing our children to be transgender, which is not true. I was so in love and proud of the little girl that I thought I had and had always wanted. And I, like any other loving parent, would not want to see my child suffer or in pain. To those who say irreparable harm is done to our children and it's just mental illness, I can tell you from experience that this is never a decision that's made lightly, with a lot of research made and a lot of appointments with therapists, psychiatrists, and doctors who went over the risks and benefits and the side effects with us. I heard one side effect here listed as PCOS. I have suffered from PCOS for 30 years, and I have not had gender-affirming care. My son had to be 18 before he could even make an appointment with a surgeon, and he also had letters from his doctor, therapist, and psychiatrist that he was ready for that step. But my son lost any hope that he would be safe to live his life, to become a nurse one day helping others, or safe to just even leave his home due to the hate and fear-mongering that has been spread. I ask you, since this bill dares to proclaim politicians know more than the doctors and the families involved, and have gone so far as to seek out people from other states who are paid to provide misleading testimony of hormones being irreversible, what is your solution for gender dysphoria, as you want to make it a mental illness and take away all help from the children and families? If my child had started his menstrual cycle 1 year earlier, he would have been treated with puberty blockers for precocious puberty, which if not treated can lead to cancer, increased heart disease risk, and metabolic disorders. Puberty blockers have been used for precocious puberty for 40 years and reversible. To those saying I was feeding into my son's delusions and he was depressed and suicidal because of treatment he received, transgender youth are not suicidal because of medical treatment, but instead because of the treatment they receive from others who make their existence a political agenda. In my son's last written words to me 2 weeks after he texted to find a lawyer, he was worried about the bills being passed. He said he was not made for a society and not strong enough to go on, that it was probably okay because he wasn't going to discover the cure for cancer, and that our love and support for him is what kept him alive as long as he was. I ask that you listen to us in opposition of this bill and do the research, get rid of any biases you already have so that you can truly help our children and not harm them like these types of bills are targeting them do. Thank you for your time.
Christy, thank you for being here. Next, we have Matthew. Matthew, welcome to committee.
Thank you, committee. My name is Matthew Obligiri. I'm a future social worker, transgender, and a lifelong Kansas resident. I'm opposed to HB 2071. I would like each of you in support of this bill today to examine your education and credentials and ask yourself, do you treat trans patients of any kind? If the answer is no, then that should be your response to this bill today. I find HB 2071 to be an egregious overreach by our government and in an attempt to oppress another marginalized community. The American dream is for all people, and the promise of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is for everyone, no matter if they agree with how they choose to live, how they enjoy their liberty, or pursue their happiness, as long as they are not infringing upon the rights of others the way in which you intend to do today. The one thing I would like you to consider is love, and that love starts with you. Once you love you, you will begin to love the whole world, and that is a marvelous feeling. Trans kids in Kansas should deserve that love, as it is our responsibility to foster a healthy environment for Kansas kids to grow up and become successful community members. However, HB 2071 is not an appropriate piece of legislation, as it infringes upon the freedoms and rights of our Kansas kids. It is your job to listen and act in accordance with the views of the constituents you work for and oppose HB 2071. Remember, Kansas is not your state, it's ours. I am in opposition to HB 2071. Let it be known that trans kids in Kansas will be loved always, forever, and no matter what. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Reverend Charles McKenzie. Reverend, welcome to committee.
Thank you very much, Chair and Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. I'm Pastor Charles McKenzie. I serve the amazing people of Grace United Methodist Church in Winfield, Kansas. I'm a lifelong resident of the state of Kansas, a lifelong Republican, and I rise in opposition to this bill today. I rise on behalf also of Kansas Interfaith Action, which is an interfaith dialogue group that represents people of many faiths across this state, and we rise collectively against this bill. I want to just name that I think you are all brilliant people, and I believe that you have read the testimony that I've submitted, so I'm not going to bore you by reading what I've already given you. I just want to take a page and a moment from this book that I hold dear and remind us of the words of the prophet of Micah, who wrote in chapter 6, verses 8, "What does the Lord require you, human, but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly." And as I read the literature of this bill, I see in it something that is terribly unkind. I also am the father, and I rise as the father of a gender non-conforming child who has lived their life in this state, both with spaces that have supported and seen them for who they are and spaces that have intentionally hurt and harmed them. And I know what it looks like on both sides. So I would ask you in the spirit, if we all remember from Bible school class growing up, there were three things that the prophets did over and over and over. They named injustice. They asked us to turn around, and they announced the day of the Lord was coming. And the day of the Lord is bad news if you are Babylon, but it is great news if you are waiting for the renewal of all creation together through a coming Messiah. So I hope that we will look and see the justice that is not capable of happening through this bill. We will see that it reaches way too far into social transitioning and things that we don't have any business trying to socially engineer here or legislate. And if we want to have good conversations directly about healthcare pieces, we should do that, but this bill is not that. So let's work together productively instead of putting something forth that is intentionally or unintentionally harmful. And with that, I'll stand for questions at the appropriate time, and I thank the committee for their work and for listening today. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend. Next, we have Stephanie Johannes. Stephanie, welcome to committee.
Thank you very much. My name is Stephanie Johannes. For the past 9 years, I've been a public high school math teacher and club sponsor in Salina. Thank you for the opportunity today to come and voice my opposition to this bill. I oppose this bill because I believe it will make my ability to educate my students more complicated. Anytime we see a parent's right taken away to make decisions about their own child, we see decreased learning in our classrooms. Our students feel less safe to express their ideas, beliefs, and values because they're not sure if those ideas, beliefs, values, opinions will be respected. Our students come and they're not as relaxed and open to learning because they're not sure what's going to happen when they go home. Their mind cannot be present. They're worried about their parents' rights. They're worried about what might happen next, what other rights might be taken away from them or their families or their loved ones. My 9 years in the classroom stand in contrast for a need for a bill like this. I have had the pleasure of watching numerous transgender and non-binary students mentor each other through the tumultuous years that are high school education. I have also walked alongside families and helped mentor that experience for them as they try to figure out what's best for their children. And that's really what our families want. Our students and our parents want the opportunity to decide for themselves what their present can look like, what their future can look like, and what the stories of their lives are going to be. And I, as an educator, want to be able to educate the youth to the best of my ability without the interference that will be a byproduct of this bill. So I ask that you oppose this bill. Thank you very much.
Stephanie, thank you very much for being here. Next, I have Victoria Kelly. Victoria, welcome to committee.
Chair and committee members, thank you for this opportunity to speak with you. In opposition to this bill, I am a physician assistant, and I currently practice and live in Lawrence, Kansas. I also happen to be a trans woman myself as well. I also see conservatively probably about 50 transgender patients in my practice. And one of the biggest important factors I want to bring to your attention today is the fact of suicide risk. As doctors, physician assistants, et cetera, we are encouraged to help prevent harms and risks to our patients. And transgender patients have a drastically increased risk of suicide over their cis counterparts. 41% will attempt suicide before the age of 30. And in 2024, it was just that year alone, 14% of trans youth attempted suicide, while 46% seriously considered it. Trans laws passed in recent years have been shown to increase suicide risks in these patients by as much as 72%. And as many people have already pointed out, being transgender is not simply a transient mental illness. There's multiple studies that have been done previous to any administration of hormones that have shown structural brain differences, physical differences in these people's brains that resemble those of the gender they identify as. This is a medical condition requiring medical care. Transition lowers suicide risk by more than 50%. It's also supported by many major medical associations, including the American Academy of Family Physicians, as well as AMA and APA and many others. The regret rate for medical and surgical transition has been shown by 3 separate studies over recent years, past 5 years, I believe, to be an average of approximately 2%. So I ask you today to please oppose this bill for the sake of our trans youth.
Victoria, thank you for being here. Next, we have Emerson. Emerson, welcome to committee.
What's up, Max? How's it going? Hi, Emerson Hovzales. So it's a German and Spanish last name. Hello. Ooh, my goodness, my words. Chairperson, Representative Carpenter, and committee members, thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Emerson Hovzales. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, en español, if you're learning. I'm an 8th year secondary English educator in Lawrence, Kansas. One of my favorite things, just like you just saw, I get to see former students out and about in the wild and doing their things, seeing them work and navigate the world. I recently just saw one of my former students working at a restaurant, and she and I, oh man, we caught up on all the things. I asked her how she's doing, what is she doing with her life, how is everything going? And unfortunately, I found out she dropped out after the semester I had her because the teachers in her space would not honor her name or her pronouns. A simple social transition ask made by a student. And I wish that her access to public school education wasn't cut short due to that very simple ask from her. We all know that it's imperative for educators to support students in their educational journey. It is my job to make sure that students understand, you know, what Shakespeare plays mean and how to do iambic pentameter, but also my job is to help provide a student the ability to learn. They can't do that if they are hungry. They can't do that if they're worried about how they're getting home. They can't do that when they have somebody misgendering them and dead naming them time and time again and validating their existence as a human being. My space, my classroom, that was something that I can control. I honored that for them. They honored that for me too, which is amazing, right? So all of these social issues within our classrooms are so intertwined with educational access that one cannot happen without the other. The same access that my student missed out on was because an educator would not refer to her by her name and pronouns. 2 simple asks made by her which were ignored. And I can't speak to medically transitioning as an educator. I can edit your essays or tell you what's going on and what something means, but what I can say is this bill can harm, will harm educators trying to support their students and the students just sitting in class. I urge you to oppose this bill. I urge you to think about our trans babies. Thank you for your time.
Emerson, thank you very much. Next, we have Angel Cushing. Is she virtual? I don't have that on here. Okay, we'll move on. Angela Turpin, doctor, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate you all listening to my testimony. My name is Angela Turpin. First and foremost, I am the wife to a great husband. I've got 3 awesome kids aged 11, 13, and 15. And I'm also a pediatric endocrinologist. I've been practicing in the Kansas City area for over 20 years. And I'm here to let you know that access to gender-affirming care is an important part of optimizing medical and mental health outcomes in transgender youth. There's numerous studies that back this up, those in the Journal of American Medical Association, the New England Journal of Medicine, the Journal of Adolescent Health, just to name a few. But I'd also like to share the flip side of this. And the flip side of this was recently published in September of 2024 in the Journal of the Nature of Human Behavior. This study, while controlling for confounding factors, found that states that enacted anti-transgender laws had a 7 to 72% increased risk of suicidality and increased past year suicide attempts, not suicidality, suicide attempts for transgender people ages 13 to 17 compared to states who did not enact these laws. And while I sympathize very much with what Ms. Cole and Ms. Reed have expressed to you today, I'm also here to tell you, I don't think that we should throw out the baby with the bathwater. We are not California. We are not Missouri. We are Kansas. And I'm here to tell you, in Kansas, we do things differently. Hearing their testimony makes me fear that there were individuals maybe not doing their due diligence, but here in Kansas, we do better. The Williams Institute at UCLA has estimated in all 50 states the percentage of transgender youth ages 13 to 17. In Kansas, they estimated that percentage to be about 1.05%. Knowing the number of kids in that age group, that 13 to 17 age group, who have been seen in a clinic in Kansas that could provide medical care, gender-affirming care, you can estimate the number of patients that are actually just seen by a mental health provider. In Kansas, that's 74% of kids with gender dysphoria are only being seen by a mental health provider. For those kids, though, that are in that 0.25%, they should be being seen in a multidisciplinary center, a center that has access to clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, social work, pediatric endocrinology, and adolescent medicine, who should be together seeing those patients and doing their homework and coming up with the past trauma, coming up with the past sexual assault, coming up with the longstanding other issues, and together pulling together to decide who might benefit. And once they decide, eligibility criteria should be met, risks should be outlined, and parents should ultimately make the decision without any force from any medical provider. The idea that someone would say, would you rather have a dead daughter and her live son, is horrifying, and no provider should say that, but it should not, again, create a blanket ban. We need to do better. We need to provide good, solid care.
Angela, thank you for being here. Committee, next we have 10 minutes of questions from any of the opponents' testimony. So, committee. Representative Myers, and who would you like to call?
Thank you. I'd like to speak with Dr. Turpin, please. Hi, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for expressing how different Kansas is from other states. I wanted to know if, for the rest of the committee who may not be as familiar with how working with transgender children may be in the process that it takes and how long that typically spans.
That's a good question.
If you could please describe that.
So we've actually looked into our patients the median, not the mean, the median, when they present, the children have known for 4 years that they did not feel their gender was assigned correctly. Parents have known for at least 2 years. So that kind of is the background of who's coming to our clinic. You have to have a letter that confirms a diagnosis of gender dysphoria from a licensed mental health provider to get into the door, but then you'll also be evaluated by one of our psychologists as well. And again, in conjunction with an entire team of people. If and when you meet Endocrine Society eligibility requirements and a parent and child agree that that's what they want, the process may be started for, depending on age, hormones. But it is a very, very gradual process. No one is started on an adult dose of testosterone or an adult dose of estrogen. These are extremely slow over the course of like 2 years that you would gradually be working up on hormones. And again, we're always working as a team, making sure that mental health, psychosocial, all of those things are being supported together and that it is a very slow, gradual process.
You may.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you tell me, in your experience, prior to children becoming involved with your clinic or with endocrinology in general, how long have they spent in the social transitioning phase?
Again, most of them are a median of 4 years before they come to us. And again, at least 2 years that they've socially transitioned typically.
Okay, thank you.
Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for DC. I never say your last name right. Heger. Okay, I didn't want to say it wrong. I'll go ahead and start asking. I worry a lot about unintended consequences, and I know you're an attorney, so sometimes I've called you in the past, especially when we dealt with this bill last year. Can you tell us a little more about your legal interpretation of how this bill, as written, would potentially impact the mental health care providers, as well as teachers, school nurses, social workers, anyone in a school setting or others?
For sure. Thank you for that question, Representative. There's 2 things that I want to point out in different sections of the bill. First would be in Section 1. In Section 1, subsection 5, it defines healthcare provider. And the scope of that is defined in a way that it says anyone that's licensed in the state to administer, quote, healthcare services. But healthcare services is not defined in the rest of the bill. So my concern there is that the scope of that includes mental health services as well as medical services. And then I'll jump down further in Section 1, subsection 10, it defines social transitioning to include talking about, outside of medical care, talking about a child's ability to use the preferred name or pronouns or manner of dress that they would like. And I raised those 2 definitions to then look at Section 2 of this bill, where some of that language is applied. Specifically, Section 2, subsection B, talks about individuals or entities that receive state funds to pay for or subsidize, quote, the treatment of children for psychological conditions. That, concerns us because that seems to include our medical and mental health providers in the state. And it also not only bans those individuals from prescribing, dispensing, or administering medication or surgery, but it also bans them from providing a referral to another healthcare provider for such medication or surgery. So that's where I'm concerned about how that's going to impact mental health care providers' ability to engage with their patients, similar to some of the discussion earlier. And then there's 2 other subsections of Section 2, subsection D and subsection F, that ban social transitioning. It says banning, promoting, or advocating the use of social transitioning, and that's banned in state properties, facilities, or buildings. And then that is also banned for, in subsection F, state employees whose official duties include the care of children. And our concern, the ACLU's read of that, is the bill does not define a state employee whose official duties, quote, include the care of children, and it doesn't state the full scope of what state properties, facilities, or buildings are implicated in subsection D. And so we're quite concerned about, as we've heard from educators in the state today, the way in which that may impact teachers who are responsible for caring for children, teachers who are in state buildings or things of this nature, and how that impacts their ability to, I heard in the testimony was talking about social transitioning, which is not talking about the medical piece of this bill at all, but just talking about counselors, therapists, social workers, teachers' ability to call a child by the name they'd like to be referred to, especially when it is not banning the ability for those state providers to do that for maybe a child whose name is Robert but likes to go by Bob, but this bill is clearly banning that for a child who would like to go by a different name. That is for the reasons of gender dysphoria. Sorry. Thank you, Representative.
You may follow up.
Thank you so much. When we talk about unintended consequences from a legal standpoint, as far as freedom of speech or other things like that, like litigiously, what could waste our taxpayer dollars in the future if we passed a bill like this? Because this will end up in court.
I think I would point to the ACLU of Kansas's full written opposition testimony that's submit in the record, because I have significantly more discussion in my written testimony and also citations there speaking to these issues. One thing I'll note is, as I mentioned in my testimony, there is a current Supreme Court case that was already argued before the United States Supreme Court that we're waiting for a ruling on. And that ruling will be binding in Kansas. And so, for example, if we get a ruling this summer from the Supreme Court that says that these types of bills are unconstitutional, then if Kansas legislature has spent, time and resources and energy this session passing a bill that the Supreme Court has just said is unconstitutional, that's one example. I think another example outside of that pending question about these type of healthcare bills is parental rights and also teachers' First Amendment rights, which are not completely, checked at the door when they're in these spaces. And so there's also extenuating civil liberties and constitutional concerns with those issues. One other thing I'll point to is the specific section or the specific case from the Kansas Supreme Court defining the scope of bodily autonomy rights in Kansas. And I think there's legal concerns with this bill related to not only the federal Constitution, but Kansas's specific constitutional rights.
Thank you very much.
Representative Peso, for you, DC also.
Actually, I didn't realize we were changing who was taking questions. Am I allowed to ask Dr. Turpin
Okay.
a question?
That's fine, too. Sorry.
Other for me.
Yep.
Okay.
My apologies. I meant to grab you while you were up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. There has been brought up the point of social contagion around gender dysphoria and gender affirming care. And since you live and work in the state of Kansas, will you mind speaking to that?
The primary study that brought up social contagion as an issue has actually been debunked, for lack of a better word. But that, again, if you're doing your due diligence and you're really talking to the patient, we go through questionnaires that ask very detailed questions. It's one thing to say, I don't like my voice, or I don't like my chest. It's another thing to say, I want a masculine chest, I want a masculine voice. And it's going through all these very detailed things that can help you pick out, was this just because maybe their friend said this or not? From our experience, we don't find that. We don't see that there's social contagion. And again, that would be pretty unique to have identified as transgender for over 4 years. Again, our median time is 4 years that these kids have identified before they're coming into our clinic. That's kind of a unique situation that you would be identifying as trans for 4 years if it's just social contagion. But the primary study has been debunked. We tend to not see that in our clinic, and we do things to try and parse out, well, were you just a victim of sexual trauma? And so the idea of just being a sexual human is horrifying to you. Those are the things that if you are doing your due diligence, you should be rooting out, and those children should not then receive treatment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Turpin, and I'd like to echo Representative Meyer's comments that we do things different here in the state of Kansas. Thank you very much.
We do. And I would also encourage anybody who, again, wants to know more specifics, I'm here.
Dr. Turpin, we're going to allow one more question. And it happens to be you. So, Representative Howell. And then we will finish the questions.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Turpin, thank you so much for being here today. I just real quickly wanted to ask you if you could tell us about how many transgender patients you serve in your clinic, And then also, part two of that question would just be, is there any kind of reporting system in the state of Kansas, since we do things differently, that reports up how many minors are receiving puberty blocker treatment in the state?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's no reporting requirements. We can pull those numbers based on prescribed medications and diagnostic codes. There's probably, in our clinic, we've got about 400 patients. Now, of course, sometimes that will include patients from other places on occasion, but about roughly 400 patients. So a very small number considering the number of children that live in the state of Kansas. Did that answer your question? I feel like there were two pieces there, and I don't know that I answered both.
I think so. I assume there's plenty of other clinics that treat transgender
Not
children.
in Kansas. No. I mean, at least there should, I mean, to be honest, there shouldn't be. I mean, if you're only talking about a patient population of about 400 people, you really need to go to specialized care. And it doesn't need to be me, it could be any, but whoever you're seeing needs to see enough patients to know the risks and the benefits. I'm kind of the natural fit because as an endocrinologist, I also prescribe hormones to the person who has panhypopituitarism, meaning you weren't born with a pituitary gland. That's what sends your message to your body to make your hormones. We have to replace those for you because they can't get the message. So if you are an adolescent that cannot make your own hormones, I'm going to be the person that you go to. So I know intimately the ins and outs of prescribing estrogen and testosterone for cisgender adolescents. I know the ins and outs of prescribing puberty blockers for the person with precocious puberty. So again, I'm going to take all those things into consideration when I'm treating somebody for gender dysphoria. It should be no different. All of those risks and benefits should be explained, should be talked about. So, yeah.
I'm sorry if I may, Chair. Let me clarify. Are you aware of any other kind of clinics that are not necessarily endocrinologists that are treating
one provider, I think that in Western Kansas that used to provide some care, and I don't know that they do anymore, and one other clinic in Wichita. There are no other clinics in Kansas that provide care.
Say, I believe there's one in the Hutchinson area, for
okay.
example.
Well, that is news to me. I would be interested to hear about that clinic.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here, Doctor.
Thank you for having me.
Conferees, I want to give yourselves a hand. I want to show my appreciation for how you've handled yourselves on such a controversial subject, and I really do appreciate that for the committee. So give yourself a hand for handling this in this way. And with that, we are adjourned. Oh, we will work this bill tomorrow. Representative Winkle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question. On the S drive, do we have access to all of the testimony that was submitted? Because I understand there's much more written.
There were over 400 pieces. The rest of it will be put on the S drive, but it takes a little bit of time to put it all together. So hopefully by tomorrow, it will all be on the S drive and on the legislative website.
So just to be clear, we will have all the testimony available to us with ample time to review before we work the bill?
That is my intent. But the rest of it is written only testimony. All of it is written only. And my intent is to have it up as soon as possible.
Very good. We're adjourned.